So as I said, this presentation is part of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. It is the largest virtual Agile gathering ever. I think the slide's a little out of date. Over 600 events. I think they're probably close to pushing 700 at this point. So it's been really big, and it's been a great event so far. Our goal here is to maintain and keep the standard that a lot of the other presenters have put on with some great stuff. Couple key points though before we start. The Agile Festival has a code of conduct, and in that code of conduct, we all are expected to treat each other with respect and kindness and professional courtesy. If you feel that these standards are not being maintained, please bring it to Ken or my attention. And if you don't think that we are handling it properly, please bring it to the attention of the organizers of this festival. So with that, additionally, the festival is it is a non-commercial event, and it's being run by volunteers who've put a lot of time, a lot of effort into getting this great event set up. So if you can head out to the website and make a small donation, and I know that will be greatly appreciated. All right, so let's get talking about metrics. So, why are Ken and I talking about metrics today? Why is this important to us?
Why are we talking about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, let's face it, we all deal with metrics every single day. Metrics are a large part of life in the corporate world. As change agents and as Agile coaches, we are expected to produce metrics to not only show how we're doing at our job, but how the organizations and the companies that we are consulting are doing and improving. Used properly, metrics can be a great tool to improve agility, growth, company performance. But we also know that when they're not handled properly, metrics can cause a lot of problems too. And so that's why we've labeled this lesson called or discussion metric mayhem, because we've seen a lot of the things that don't necessarily go right with metrics and some of the troubles they can cause. So we're going to talk about that today. But before we get into that, let's introduce ourselves. Ken, do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ken Roberts. I'm owner and transformation consultant at Better Ways Agility. I'm passionate about creating environments where learning cultures emerge and organizations can adapt to change. I believe the power of connection helps people and companies to grow. I've helped a lot of organizations, large and small, transition to new ways of working, resulting in better customer value delivery and deeper engagement through collaboration. I've got a whole bunch of certifications. You can read them there on the screen. Pat, you want to go next?
Great. So yeah, my name is Patrick Delaney. I go by Pat. I am a lean Agile coach. I've been in corporate IT for well over 20 years now, and I have a lot of experience pre-Agile as an employee. I discovered Agile about a decade ago, and I liked it. But I didn't really think much of it because I said, well, that's great, but how's that going to work with a company with thousands of people? And then I discovered Scaled Agile, and that was like the Reese's peanut butter commercial of old, where you got chocolate in my peanut butter, I got peanut butter in your chocolate, and I really liked both of them together. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been helping organizations implement Scaled Agile from the team all the way up to the portfolio level. I also work with other Agile professionals, help coach them in how they can transition from traditional command and control waterfall mindset into being a lean Agile leader. All right. Ken.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, I apologize here. I'm having some difficulties with Zoom. It's not cooperating. Anyway, yeah, so why we measure, how we measure, and what we measure, we're going to talk about here. This target audience is Agile transformation folks, right? Agile coaches, practitioners, and transformation leaders. But it's also our corporate leaders, our business stakeholders, and those that are engaged and involved with selecting and working through and working with metrics. All right, so what we want to do is we do a little bit of a quick exercise here. We're going to do, we have a question for you. Why do we measure? Why do we measure? We're going to try using Mentimeter to do this. And what I'm going to do is, if you go to menti.com and use code 7131 821. And what I'm also going to do is I'll post it here in the chat, assuming I can get Zoom to cooperate. Come on, be kind to me. We just want one or two words regarding why it's important to measure. Why do we measure things? So Pat, are you going to share the screen on that one?
Yeah, I'm going to give everybody a couple seconds to type in their words, a word or two.
Yeah,
short
great
expression.
idea.
Why
I'm
do
not
we
sure
measure?
why I'm having some difficulty actually posting in the chat, which is interesting to me.
And we haven't had anybody put anything in yet. Let me close that, come back in.
Ken, what's the code? Can you repeat again?
What's that?
Can you repeat the code? Menti
The
code?
the code you had shown isn't working.
Yeah,
It
it
is-
isn't working.
Yeah, it's not working.
Oh no, that's not good.
Oh, we just tested this yesterday. So let's just do this verbally then.
Yeah.
Give us a couple
You could
reasons
throw it
why.
in the chat thread too.
We can put that in the chat once I figure out how to show the chat. There we go. Code doesn't work. Code is not valid. Yeah, put some thoughts in chat. Why do you think, why do we measure? To show progress, to get better. Reference points for self-reflection, to observe, see opportunities, to see what's happening, identify issues, to make sure we are headed in the correct direction. Can't manage without measuring. Can't fix what we don't. Gone too fast, man. Performance enhances. Reality. All right, we got an active
Evaluate
group.
controls, bonuses.
Bonuses. There we go. To get our bonuses. Learning opportunities. Sprint velocities to speak with the business in their language. Yeah, a lot of stuff out here. A couple new ones in here too. Hold on.
Yeah. Evidence base.
Evidence
Get
based.
someone fired? Oh, I hope not.
Someone fired. Yeah. Yeah.
Measure
So there's
productivity of the team. Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk about that one.
empirical trend insights. Measure what matters. Yep. Insert whole book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah,
Trend.
so-
Arun says trend. Michelle says insights. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff here. So,
Mhm.
All right, let me close that. So let's, so yeah, I think a lot of you hit the nail on the head. We a lot of reasons why we measure, and there's a lot. As someone mentioned, the book about OKRs, John Doerr, measure what matters. So what we've done here is we've kind of broken it down into three broad categories of why why we measure, and specific to Agile, why we measure. The first reason we measure is we want to validate outcomes. Did we achieve what we expected to achieve? And we also want to measure progress, assess where we are. Are we on track towards achieving our objectives? And then finally, we want to measure, and this is a broad category, to gain insights, and to gain insights into our systems, our processes, our organization, and into what our customers are doing and in the marketplace as a whole. So it encompasses a lot of the things that you all just said. The first area we're going to measure is outcomes. This is the end state or the objective. Our outcome measures, need to align and map back directly to our company objectives and our corporate goals. These are often financial measures or capabilities when we're talking about business or technical capabilities. And these measures are really good at telling us if we hit or miss the target. But they don't tell us if we are on or off track towards meeting the objective during the implementation. It's not good enough to, it's not, if you're looking to grow sales, 100%, and you're 1/10 of the way in it, did we grow at 10%? The world isn't linear. A lot of times, our outcome measures really don't provide any insight into whether we're on track or not on track. And that's why they're often called lagging indicators. And lagging indicators are things that, they only tell us what happened. They tell us the past. They tell us that a new trend has emerged after it's obvious to us. And so they're not really good at that. They're not really good at helping us along the way, especially when we're talking about long initiatives that take time to implement. And this is why, we need additional types of measures that we're going to call progress measures. So we're going to measure for progress. And these progress measures are, they inform us of what's going on during implementation. They help us make decisions. They tend to be predictive in nature. We use proxies for this. And the proxies aren't the outcome measure. There's things that are different. So for example, if we're measuring, if our goal is to increase sales, we're not going to use a sales report to do that. We're going to take a look at traffic, whether it's web traffic, whether it's app downloads or foot traffic in a store as a proxy to measure that. And these have been around a long time, long before Agile. The old Farmer's Almanac uses acorn drops to tell whether it's going to be a snowy winter or not. So that's an example of a leading indicator. Don't ask me if it's a good leading indicator or not. I've expended my knowledge on that topic. But the idea is something total, it's often unrelated, and that's why we use proxies. But they're really, really important because we need the information that these progress measures provide us so that we can make decisions, so we can make adjustments along the way. Our progress measures also need to be tied to our outcome measures. What makes a really good progress measure for one set of outcomes is probably not a very good measure for an unrelated outcome measure. So they need to go hand in hand.
Yeah, so we're measuring for insight. That's another thing, right? So insight metrics help provide information on how our systems, process, organization are functioning or not functioning. But it may also be things that are outside of our influence or control, right? They may require some analysis, maybe some trending. We generally use them for learning opportunities, informed decision making. So some examples using like how many issues are in the support queue, what's our current web server application utilization, or even things like employee turnover rate may be things that give us insight. And again, these are things that we may or may not have control over at times, but we want to be able to use this information to help make decisions, right? So, yep. Yeah, so we're going to talk about how we measure here. So what we see, anti-patterns, we're going to talk about some of the anti-patterns that we've seen, a few examples. We're also going to talk about some stories that tie up with that and some practices and things to consider in relation to those.
So our first anti-pattern we labeled velocity abuse. We often find that velocity is one of the most abused metrics in the world of Agile. And here's a story about one organization beginning a transformation, and the managing director asked for a report on Agile performances from his teams. And so the Agile coach dutifully produced a report showing the team's velocities like the one below. What do you think happened? So here you are. This report is produced. It's given to the managing director, and it gets published out there for everybody to see. How do you think the teams responded to this report?
They saw the math wasn't right. If I'm seeing it correct, 1066 is not the average of three numbers.
No, it's probably not.
Yeah.
They saw that there was a math error. That's good. That's why we have engineers, smart people, figure this stuff out. But what else did they say?
We should not be comparing team velocities, right? If you want to look at the overall program level velocity, you can't just take the team's velocity and say, hey, this is the average for the program, because each team has, they could be pointing their stories very differently. They could be just the way they work could be very different from each team to other. So 28 points in one team and 28 points in a different team could be completely different aspects of work.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'm the managing director, Suman, and your team's just not cutting it. So
Right.
What are you going to do? I mean,
That's
look
the
at
wrong message we're sending here,
your
right?
velocity. I say that sarcastically, but your team is, not getting enough velocity. You guys got to work harder.
Exactly, and I think that's the wrong message we're sending by even sharing this report. We are setting up a wrong message because maybe we need to work on, hey, we need Agile more at the top and then rather than the teams. Yeah, the teams are maybe doing Agile, but do we have our managers or MDs? Are they thinking Agile? Are they asking for the right data?
Yeah. So that's great. So the idea here, you're exactly right. So what ended up happening? This was a real example. So what happened was I call velocity inflation. So when you go back, these teams just said, well, I don't want to be showing 17. I want to be showing a higher number. So what they did is they just increased their velocity with no real improvement in outcomes or even performance. So there's a number of anti-patterns that would describe this, Hawthorne effect, Goodhart's law, Campbell's law, all wrapped into one.
Are you saying they essentially game the system?
Yeah, exactly it. And so, yeah, as a coach, and at the time, Ken and I were both coaches here. We weren't the ones that made the report. We were the one fighting the report. And I have to remind them, story points are designed to help teams plan a sprint, so that they don't overcommit and they don't undercommit. They're not there to measure team outputs. It's not what it's designed for. So you can use user story count versus velocity to mitigate this, but then that creates other anti-patterns. And the key. Go ahead.
Are you suggesting not to look at velocity? Because
No. What we're saying is not to turn it into a report card.
Yeah,
that's what we're getting to here.
But there's a lot of great information here, right? I mean, Yogi's team. So, what was the impediments they ran into on Sprint 9? Is it was because they didn't meet their commitment? Did they run into issues with story quality? What's going on there? So from a coaching standpoint and a transformation standpoint, it's pretty good information to have and collect and look for opportunity. Yeah,
it is. And that's the way you use it as a coaching opportunity for a team. The key is not to turn it into a report card. And that's what it did here. It turned it into a report card. And that's what we don't want to have happen. And that was the anti-pattern we saw there. And when you combine that with a leadership that has not quite made that agile transition, it produced a number of anti-patterns.
Right. I mean, some of the things we're trying to avoid here are judgment, as an example, right? So, if leadership is judging the team based upon these numbers, what's going to happen, right? Without the context of understanding, the questions that you were asking are important ones to ask, obviously, like what really went on during that. It may have nothing to do with the team. It may have to do with the context of the situation and, opening up conversations around that, what's important. Patrick put a couple of definitions up here. I just want to run through those real quick, just to kind of give you an idea of some things to think about, right? So we talk about Hawthorne, or the observer effect. You can think about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? So monitoring a metric may subtly or sometimes not subtly influence people to maximize that measure, right? So in the case of velocity, teams are like, okay, we're going to have velocity. We want to make sure that when we estimate our stories, we try to estimate as high as we possibly can, because we're going to be measured on velocity. And that's not what you want, right? That's not the behavior you want out of this, right? Another example could be call centers, like the calls completed per hour. Well, if you start tracking that, then you're going to find that people are going to reduce the amount of time that they're engaging with the customers, and there's an impact to that, right? So it impacts behavior, and that's what we're trying to get to. Goodhart's law and Campbell's law, which is sort of related. Goodhart's law is when a measure becomes a target, ceases to be a good measure. So people work to impact the measure at the cost of the usefulness of the measure and even the outcome we want. And forcing a number to change won't impact our intended outcome. We think about things like zero error fallacies. Having zero defects may not equate to quality if it is a target, because people are going to be gaming the system to make sure that they get zero defects, even when there's quality issues with the system. Also, the other thing is Campbell's law, which is, again, measures tend to be corrected or gained when using for target setting. A good example of that is grade inflation, which is some of the things we face. So, people end up teaching to the test answers rather than being concerned about the concepts and the use of knowledge. The test scores and everything becomes more important than actual imparting knowledge and everything. So these are just some examples of things to think about. Right. So this is one of those cases. I'm going to show you another case here where basically management kind of picked the wrong metrics here. So management wanted to monitor and improve the quality. And the decision was made for the QA folks within teams to track defects, including defects discovered during the sprint, and report the number they discovered back to QA management. So what do you folks think happened here?
Sounds like a waterfall team. Sounds like lots of handoffs.
Oh, there you go. Got a lot of handoffs. Yeah, exactly, right? Well, here's what happened. There's behavioral aspect as well, right? So testers felt compelled to make sure that they had numbers to report to management, right? Because after all, that's what we're measuring. And there was a perception that the more defects the QA person found, the better the tester, right? So now you've got testers within a team who are going out of their way to make sure that they find defects. So the defects were found and they were discussed with the team after they were logged, right? And there's, like you said, there's a lot of back and forth in terms of tracking, logging, and management. But what the impact really was also that there were created diversity within the team and prevented teams from developing into high-performing teams. I mean, one of the things that we were trying to do in that case is have teams that were working together as a team. Well, if you're setting up an adversarial relationship between QA and developers that way, that's what ends up result. As a matter of fact, no additional value was created, and value delivery actually went down because of all those handoffs and overhead, right? So there's an impact to those things, and we got to be careful of them. We got to consider things like siloed behaviors, right? If we're trying to have a full team, we don't want them to be divided into silos and have measurements that are going to impact their perception around those. And we also want to make sure that we're considering systems view, like if we're stepping back and looking at it from an enterprise or from a coaching point of view, we got to consider that we don't want to sub-optimize, and that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to sub-optimize on QA performance within a team rather than looking holistically. Maybe they would have been better to take a look at things like escape defects. There are some issues with escape defects as well. They're not perfect, but they probably are going to get you closer to where you want to go than trying to measure QA impact within a team.
Our third and final example here, we titled Vanity Metrics. So in this scenario, we had an Agile PMO, which was really a consulting company, came in and they put together a 5-point scale to measure each team, based on a 1 to 5 on each team. And they produced a report that looked something like this. It was sent out in a big PowerPoint, a presentation to leadership. And what do you think happened? Well, I mean, the outcome is that people were blindsided. They didn't really know, teams didn't know that they were getting this report done on them. One leader got it and passed it down the line to their scrum master, say, hey, why do we look bad? Again, we got the report card effect. Capturing metrics and using those metrics is not necessarily a bad thing, and it's a very good, powerful tool. But used improperly, the how we measured produced a lot of negative results. We weren't measuring outcome. We weren't measuring progress. It lacked local context. Just because a team had a low score in one area did not necessarily mean they weren't delivering value. So again, it became a report card and not a tool.
So what are vanity metrics, Pat?
Yeah, so good question. So when we talk about vanity metrics are generally the things that are easy to measure and are designed to make ourselves look good. They're generally focused on one area. Like I'm going to have vanity metrics that measure. My favorite one is SLA. SLA is my favorite vanity metric. One work center, like say information protection, will have an SLA. They're going to respond to your ticket in 2 weeks. Okay, and they hit it 96% of the time. But that's great. But that that's just one area. How did it affect the overall initiative, the overall value flow, the overall process? So in short, vanity metrics don't improve productivity or outcomes. They're just designed to make you look good. And we want to avoid them. We want to measure the whole, our whole process. And we want to use our process tools or those insight metrics to create insights to begin a conversation on how we go about improving. Instead, when they're misused, they create anti-patterns, and then they become barriers to agility. They create an environment of lack, of lack of trust, and it just makes it more difficult for us to do our jobs. So we talked about some anti-patterns here. We talked about why we measured. We talked about some stories about how you can do the wrong thing when you're measuring. So what we want to talk about next is some best practices on measuring. And we give you some best practices on measuring for outcomes, some best practices on measuring for progress or progress measures, and then finally a few on insight when it comes to agility. But we've got a couple of recommendations here right off the bat that apply to all of our measurements and metrics. The first is, and this is key, understanding why you're measuring in the first place. Why are you measuring? Is this measure designed to measure outcome? Is it designed to measure our progress towards an outcome? Is it designed to gain insight into a certain area of our organization? So always start with why, because if you don't, you end up with some really bad unintended consequences. The second thing is, don't select your metrics in a vacuum. Consult your teams when you're selecting them. Make sure they understand why you're measuring them and get their input. And then certainly don't go broadcasting them out without even letting the team see them first. That seems pretty obvious, but I've seen that happen so many times, it's just not helpful. Next thing we're going to talk about is when we're talking about outcome measures. And when we're doing outcome measures, we want to make sure our outcome measures are aligned back to the company or the organizational objectives. They should be traceable. We want to measure the entire value stream, not just the individual work center, like that example I gave you with information protection. We want you to have the courage to quantify your outcome measures. It's not enough to say better, faster, cheaper. You want to be 35% faster, 20% better, reduce costs by a certain amount, a specific amount. So you want to have the courage to quantify. We also want to use what we're going to call interlocking metrics. We want to measure a couple things at a time, because sometimes you can optimize one thing at the expense of everything else. And I think many of us have seen this before. To measure time to market with no consideration of quality is a disaster waiting to happen. So that's what we mean by we want to have these interlocking metrics. We don't have 1,000 metrics, but we want to have a few that counterbalance each other. And then finally, all of our outcome measures need to be supported with progress measures so that we know if we're on track as we, proceed. A few best practices for progress metrics. Again, our progress metrics should align and support our outcome metrics. They should be actionable, informed decision-making. These are they should be predictive in nature so that we know if we're on track or we're off track. They give us time to make adjustments. It's much better to know you're being set up to, that you're on the wrong track after 3 months and spending $30,000 than it is to go 3 years and spend $3 million to find out you made some bad decisions. Early on, we can make adjustments. Or if, it's an innovative type of thing, we can say, okay, it was a good idea, but it's not going to pan out, and cut bait and move on to the next thing. When we are creating progress metrics, especially for large initiatives that span times, we find dashboards and gauges work really well to create a visual presentation about how we're doing. And then also when you're selecting your progress metrics, you want to understand where you are in the product development life cycle. So from the lean startup, thinking about, are you in that innovation discovery area early on, or on your leap, or are you in the leap of faith assumption, or are you building out your solution? Because where you are in that process will determine the types of leading indicators that you would like to use, or progress measures.
Yes, we talk about best practices for insight metrics, really kind of keeping in mind the intent, right? Basically what we're trying to do is gain knowledge and learn from these things, right? Rather than use them to evaluate performance, right? We're using them to inform our decision-making, for discovery, and we're focusing on gaining a knowledge, right? That's what we want to do. What's important here is keeping the context in mind. For example, if for some odd reason you're measuring at the team level or at the organizational level even, understanding the context of where these metrics are coming from is critical. So the key here is really the metrics are an invitation to a conversation. And the metrics should be an indicator or a gauge and not necessarily the target. It's something you want to monitor. It's something you want to keep an eye on. But without that context, without that conversation, you're going to find that you're not going to get as much value out of them. And you can move on next slide, Pat. If you want to add anything there. Oh, yeah, we'll talk more about the human aspect in a little while. So we'll talk about what we measure as well. So Pat, do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah. So.
So here's the key, right? Not everything important can be measured as well. This is actually a quote from W. Everett Deming. It's wrong to suppose that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. You think about things like culture and leadership and mindset and collaboration. These are all things that are very difficult to quantify. You can end up using proxy measures for those things sometimes, for some aspects of those. But what he found in some organizations, they get so focused on the metrics that they miss the outcomes and they miss other intangible things that are also important that need to be done in order to help create an agile organization or agile approach to the outcomes that they're looking for.
Okay, so some examples of what we measure in terms of, and we paired these up with business outcomes and progress measures. And we're going to give you 3 examples here, and they're generic examples, and just kind of to illustrate the linkage in between these. So for the first example is a business outcome. We want to grow sales of an existing product by 100% in 12 months. That's our outcome metric. It's specific, it's measurable, it's quantified. And then we're going to have a number of progress measures. And these could be measured, these could be quantified as well. We just didn't do it here. We might want to count the number of new sales leads. We want to double the number of sales leads. We might want to see a 50% increase in web and foot traffic. We want to double our advertising buys and coverage. We might count the number of new customer inquiries and the growth rate. The number of new reseller channels that have been added, app store downloads, things like that are examples of progress measures that support that business outcome.
There's also a technology outcome and progress metrics that we can have, right? So improve system reliability, as an example, may be an outcome, right? Where we're trying to basically increase the system uptime. So defect measures could be things like number of defects remediated, the trend, the number of issues that are opened, and Pat provided a good one there in terms of reduced coffee sales at the cafe. Do you want to tell that story, Pat?
Yeah, so this is a good example. I had an initiative years ago where we're trying to reduce the amount of time it took to log on into a system. And the behavior was that people would go up to their desk, they would log in, they would click to open, the app or go to log in, and it would take 30 minutes. So they would just put their bag down and they'd go down to the cafeteria and get a coffee. And so our goal was to, we wrote it up as one of our leading indicators was going to be the line at the coffee stand in the morning at 8:30 in the morning is going to be shorter, a lot shorter. And that's that was one of our indicators whether it was working, because exactly, when we reduced the amount of time, they didn't have time to get their coffee.
I have a feeling some folks made time for that anyway.
Yeah, we didn't put them out of business. A lot of times what they did, Ken, though, is they would come in with their coat on still and their bag in their hand and get their coffee, instead of going up to their desk, putting it all down, and then going and getting the coffee.
There you go.
Our third example here is kind of a mix of a business and a technology initiative. So the outcome metric was goal was to eliminate corporate travel by 3% by building out smart virtual meeting rooms. This is all pre-pandemic, as you can probably imagine. A global company, 3% of travel is a lot of money. So we had some progress measures here. We built a few of these meeting rooms, and what we did was we looked at meeting utilization the month before we set up these new smart meeting rooms that did not require a laptop. And we looked at utilization a month after, 2 months after, and we compared them to the other rooms to see if they were getting used more. The other thing we looked at is, we asked people the time, how long, we put a timer in these rooms. How long did it take you to get the meeting set up? It was taking 12 minutes before we implemented the smart technology. Our goal was to get it down to under a minute. So we were measuring that as a leading indicator. And then finally, we left little like golf, miniature golf cards, survey cards in the room with a little box to get the voice of the customer feedback, to gauge whether it was positive. Did they like these rooms and would they use them? So that was the way we got some, leading indicators before we did that on maybe, I guess, like 2 or 3 rooms per location. And there were 4 locations rather than doing 250 rooms all in one shot. So that's an example of how you tie your outcome, goal, or metric to progress measures. Had we found that, they could start the meeting quickly, but they didn't like it, then we would have cut bait and we would have said, okay, let's go work on something else. Or we would have dove deeper into, what would get you to want to use the meeting and cut travel down. Any questions on some of these business outcome measures and the progress measures and how we combine them? All right, lastly, Ken, you want to talk about insight measures with agility?
Yeah, so caution when using agility metrics, right? So we know that metrics are really useful for getting information, getting attention where we may want to get it, right? We talked about how likely it is you'll get the change in behavior, but will you be getting the ones that you want? So you may want to consider when you design your metrics to actually design them in such a way to align the behaviors that you're looking for as well. Again, keeping metrics in context is important. We want to avoid the report cards that we talked about. We also don't want to focus on too many metrics at once. If you get to the point where you're overloaded with them, then they start to become less valuable. So you want to try to look at what you're focusing on currently and be willing to change that focus when you try to start working with something new. And I think, again, we talked about this before, but metrics are an invitation or a conversation, and the metrics an indicator, not the target. Go on to the next slide, Pat. Yeah, so really what it comes down to is considering that human factor, right? We know that people's behavior and focus is going to change based upon their metrics that you use. That's just part and parcel of it, right? And that can reinforce existing or create new behaviors. Also keep in mind that as people start changing their behavior, the impact and usefulness of those metrics will end up changing as well. And also keep in mind, people jump to conclusions. So we are meaning-making machines, right? That's what we do. As human beings, we see something and we tend to jump to conclusions almost immediately because that's the way that we're wired, right? You got to ask questions around these. The context and the circumstances of the way the metrics are measured impact what those metrics really mean. And what I also find is people tend to jump to conclusions the farther away they are from actually where the metrics being measured. So for example, if we've got people that are 2 or 3 or 4 levels up in a hierarchical organization that are looking at metrics, they're going to jump to different conclusions than folks that are actually doing the measurement and everything. You got to make sure that they have those conversations. The other thing is people can forget or misunderstand the intent behind a metric and focus on the metric itself. talking about the outcomes over and over again helps to make sure that they focus on really what it is that we're trying to go for. Focus on the fact that these things are gauges rather than targets, and help us to meet the intent of what we actually want to do.
All right. With that said, we're just going to give you a couple examples here of insight metrics on agility. And the idea is we looked at this from the perspective, we gave the metric a name and the desired behavior. And these are ones that I use, on a regular basis. And again, don't turn them into report cards. They're the beginning of a conversation. Estimating accuracy. Is the team any good at estimating? This is a tool that, you can use if, they keep saying we're going to do 100 points and they deliver 30. We're going to do 94 points and then they deliver 26. It's a way to help them focus on spending time to become a little bit more accurate. Maybe spend a little more time doing planning poker right. Velocity, predictability, similar, are they consistent over time? Does their velocity go up and down, like a seesaw each sprint, or are they fairly consistent and predictable? So if you're trying to make your team more predictable, you measure velocity predictability. Backlog health is one of my favorites for teams that just never can seem to find the time to do refinement ahead of the sprint. So you start measuring backlog health, and that kind of encourages them to actually start doing backlog refinement and get a healthy backlog. Similarly, with retrospective follow-up is one I use when teams that, we did a retro, but they went through the motions, but they never really focus on improving because they're too busy. Well, just by measuring it, you can, you're now they're going to look at it. And again, don't turn them into report cards. These are things that you as a coach or a scrum master or a team member should be working on with your teams. And then the final two I use when I'm dealing with scaled agile or programs at the feature level: feature delivery rate, feature substitution. I've had, one time I had one art that, they committed to 40 features. They got 40 features done, but they weren't the 40 they had planned. They were 10 of the ones they planned and 30 ones that, they changed scope mid program increment without any real rhyme or reason. So again, these metrics were used as a tool to help steer these organizations towards the behavior we wanted them to have. Similarly, you can do the same things with DevOps and automation. If you want them to embrace test automation, then start measuring how many things they're measuring, they're automating. But remember, they're not outcome measures. These are measures you're using to help change behaviors and encourage the adoption of agile behaviors, not necessarily agile outcomes. And then once you get the behavior you want, the key is then stop using the metric. Then move on to something else to get the behavior you would like.
Yeah, I think a key important to this is like the collaboration between the folks that, basically you want to make sure that you're collaborating about those folks that are involved with the measurement, right? That you're engaging them in that conversation to make sure that everybody's clear on what it is that we want, and they have got input into these things as well. So I guess we have Q&A right now, and I've got a question from Mike G. Can you talk to how you set the conversation for the venue and cadence for looking over the metrics?
Do you want to take that, or do you want me to take it?
You want to go for it? Go for it, Pat.
I'll go first. Well, again, I like to discuss metrics with my teams, or if it's a program, with the program, and start with why. Why are we measuring? These are the metrics we're putting up. If I'm talking about outcome measures, we're going to talk about the outcome measures. Why are outcomes important? These are progress measures. Where did we get these progress measures from? They support the outcome measures. What do we expect to use these metrics for? If we're doing insight metrics on our teams, why are we measuring this? Well, we're trying to start with why. I often use these team level insight metrics to change behaviors, to encourage people to shed traditional ways of working and adopt Scrum and Agile practices like backlog refinement, to get past it. We don't have time to do that. What I don't do is answer that, broadcast that out to everybody before I show it to the team.
Yeah. Just to add a couple things as well, when we were talking about the venue and the cadence. I think that certain metrics apply at different levels of an organization. Like it may make sense for a group of teams to have a metrics if they're looking at things from a program point of view. And that those metrics may not move outside of that team. That's kind of what you want, actually, for them to kind of take ownership over those metrics, to use them themselves to improve, right? So the venue, what I found a lot of companies is that, people tend to take these things and create PowerPoint slides and then show them to leadership. And I'm not sure that exactly always creates the conversation points that you want. I know, Pat, you mentioned creating gauges and dashboards and things. You want to keep track and monitor those things on a pretty frequent basis, right? And ideally have the metrics be available most of the time or all the time if you can do it. In terms of cadence, that's going to vary as well. When are you doing your retrospectives? When are you retrospecting? When are you taking a look at things and seeing how the customers are doing? When do you need to start projecting as to what's going to happen, next quarter, the quarter after? And I say projection because it's always a guess, but I don't know. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Pat?
No, I think we answered that question.
Yeah, so Alpesh is saying you'd like to replace the text estimating accuracy on the slide with commitment accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it a number of things. I know some people don't like to measure estimating accuracy. And again, I always come down to it's the context. What is the behavior you're trying to encourage, and use the metric to drive that behavior.
Yeah, and I struggle with estimation accuracy and even commitment accuracy, right? The question at the end of the day for me is, the question for me for the end of the day is the team doing what's right for our customers and for our company, right? And do they have the information and things that they need in order to make those things happen, right? So, we could talk about commitment and that sort of thing, but we are in an agile space, which means we do want to adapt and change based upon where we want to go, but we want to align with the outcomes that we're focused on where we can.
I think a good question here. What is my favorite metric? And again, it's really to determine whether a team is producing. So the measure of progress is, do we have satisfied customers? So it's really the demo is almost the best metric. It's the best measure. Is the customers happy? Look at their faces. If you are in the same room, listen to their tone of voice. Are they excited? Do they like what they see? That's the most important thing if you're talking about measuring the outcome, that the team or your program team is producing. As far as comparing different organizations, I think what we've been pretty much saying is don't do it. Try not to do it, because you're comparing apples to oranges. A team that's, has 4 people on it is not going to compare and doing the same exact thing as a team that has 8 developers on it is not going to produce the same amount of work or outcome or output. Outcome's a different story, but it's a meaningless comparison. What we want to compare a team is to itself over time. We want a trend, and that's where we focus on the retrospective and that continuous improvement aspect.
Yeah. So Alpesh brings up a good point, right? It's a lot of times these metrics about protecting the team from overcommitment. Work in process, as an example, is something good to look at for teams, right? You want to have an idea of how much they've got going on at one time. If they're overloaded, we know what's going to end up happening. They're not going to be able to produce the value that they need. So, and when I say monitoring work in process, it isn't just at the team level, it's throughout the entire organization. That's something you want to take a look at. It's just one of those rampant issues and problems that I find with most organizations is everybody tries to commit to too much.
I like this question too. How can these metrics be leveraged to show the value ROI of an organization in the midst of an agile transformation to show the value of agile?
Awesome. You want to handle that one? I can jump on that one.
Yeah, jump on it, and then I'll give you my thoughts on it too, if you want.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the outcomes again, so in my mind, agile is not an outcome in and of itself, right? It's a way to get someplace for a company or organization, right? So most companies out there are interested in engaging with their customers and getting some good results with them, right? So maybe in this case, what you want to take a look at are things like NPS, right? How much happier are customers doing? There's lagging indicator associated with revenue associated with NPS, right? If we know our customers are happy, they're going to spend more with us. But you can look at those types of things to help. That's just one example of the types of things you want, but you want to tie it to the outcomes of what the individual company, the leaders of the company, and the whole company itself wants, and tie it back to those things. Pat, what would you want to add on that?
You know, I love this question because I'm a consultant and I deal with this all the time. And I get asked, you know, what's the ROI and the value? And I said, well, if you can tell me what the output you have right now coming from waterfall is, then we can measure it, you know, after 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and we can compare it. And what I often find is companies really can't quantify how much their IT department produces in a year. They can quantify how much they spend. They can't quantify the value they deliver. So what I usually like to start with is, our first step is, let's quantify value, or let's identify the outcomes we want. And then once we have that discussion of what outcomes we want, how are we going to measure those outcomes? So
what does success look like, for example?
Yes, exactly. What does success look like? So I'll sit down, like I had a client a year or so ago, and it was tech services or infrastructure and operation. And they were going Agile because development was going Agile and some other reason. And I sat down with the senior VP tech service, asked the question, what are your goals? And his goals were, it took a while, but was to quantify value and to align to application development. And then finally got into the whole discussion of how unplanned work is the death of them. And so it really became about managing, quantifying and managing unplanned work. So once we identified what the outcome was, the goals, then we could come up with proxy or progress metrics towards that. And then we put a whole coaching regimen around it. That's how we designed the transformation.
The bigger problem is if they don't know what success is, or they don't know why they don't have a real good reason for wanting to transition to Agile, other than their boss has told them that they need to transition to Agile.
Yeah, you know, and we see that a lot. And I always tell them, I say, listen, you want to be relevant in your job in 2, 3, 5 years, you need to do it. It's been my experience as a coach, the people who fight it are the ones that end up, you know, calling me a couple of years later, asking me, for, you know, to help them find a job. So I'm not above using fear.
I am, but you go for it.
To get where Ken's a purist. I'm not above using passive aggressive fear sometimes, but it is hard. I mean, you get this in big hierarchical organizations. You know, the executives get, you know, they see Agile, they want to do it, they get it, and they just pass it down. And then they don't understand, as you go a couple levels down, they don't understand why in middle management. And that's one of the nice things about our presentation here is it's open source. You guys can have it. You can download it from the site. And it's something you can use within your organization. And the key moral we start with here is start with why. Why are you measuring? And then how are you measuring? And then once you figure those things out, what you measure is pretty easy.
Yeah, you just got to, again, keep in mind the impact of what it is that you're choosing to measure and the way that you use it. That's really what's key, right? So, go ahead.
No,
Pat.
I think I'm just scrolling to see if we have
thunder here.
No, I think it was good. It's a hard question. We all struggle with it. I don't think we nailed the question. I think we gave some support to it, but it's a challenge we have in this industry as coaches and as consultants and as, you know, practice leaders. How do we quantify it? I think it starts with recognizing we don't quantify in waterfall, and let's take a first step in painting the desired outcome, and then go from there. All right, we're out of time now, so.
Yeah, that's okay.
So let's just kind of recap here. A couple key takeaways. Let's start with why. Always start with why before you measure. Then decide how you're going to measure, paying close attention to not create these unintended anti-patterns. And then what becomes a little bit easier. It's the last thing we get. And finally, the metrics are an invitation to start a conversation, you know, towards improvement. Oops.
Awesome. All right, so I'm one of the co-organizers of the Princeton Agility, who is one of the kind of the hosts of this, along with Agile 20. Princeton Agility, we're a group of people who are passionate about building community, support, capability, and Agile mindsets in our area. We create opportunities for connection, sharing, knowledge, and leadership. So we and the people we work with can better learn, adapt, honor our customers, our workers, and people that are workers, deliver value, and enjoy what it is that we do. Our next meetup is actually on February 24th, and it was just added to the Agile 20 Reflect Festival site today. We're doing a panel discussion regarding careers in Agiles for people that are seeking jobs, people that are hiring, recruiters, etc. For more information, check out the Agile 20 Reflect site. I copy and paste into the chat right now, but again, unfortunately, Zoom is not cooperating with me in terms of the chat. So, but yeah, you could also look for Lean Coffee Princeton. If you go under meetup.com, you'll find it there. So, yeah, thank you for attending, folks. Pat, what did you want to add?
I just want to give a big shout out to Scott and the host committee for the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. They've been great, and this is just a fantastic forum that they put together, and I hope that they continue it in some form or another. So,
we hope that you continue to do great events like this. Imagine this goes in the archive, and maybe August or something, someone in Kenya might want to know about metrics and goes and looks and watches this, and then suddenly gets a much clearer idea. Or someone in Vietnam. It's amazing what we can do if we just share this information. Thank you for putting it into the body of knowledge.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you all for attending.
Yep, I got the chat working finally. So I actually put some links in there for everybody. And if you want to continue the conversation, we have a Slack channel as well. I've got a join link for there, and we've got a metrics channel under Slack for that. But thank you so much for organizing this, Pat.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody, have a fantastic Agile day.
All right. See you tomorrow, Pat.
Thank you.
I am.